check everyone can hear me. If we get any thumbs up or comments, just to make sure my audio's okay for everyone. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks very much for joining. We will kick off momentarily. If I could just ask if there's any questions throughout this session, please pop them in the chat. We're going to try and deal with those in real time where it makes sense, and we may bring them to the end if not. We are recording this, as you've just seen, so this will be shared and made available afterwards. We'll also be making the slide deck available afterwards as well, so feel free to take notes if you want, but we will have this coming out. And then just finally, if I could just ask to make sure that you're muting your microphones and cameras are off just throughout this session, and stick to the chat if possible, please. But thank you for joining. We'll get into our presentation today. Just ask Pascaline to share our slides. We're actually going to kick off with a poll to get things going. Really, we just want to know where you guys are at the moment with these different pressures that we're seeing students face today at institutions. And we're going to be, these are the bit of an advert as well for the key areas we're going to be covering today with the University of Birmingham. And I guess for a lot of institutions, it's probably a mixture, if not all of these things that we're struggling with. Yeah, financial coming out quite strong, mental health. Okay. Perfect. That's really helpful. It just gives Cherry and I a way of focusing on the right areas as we go into this. We're just going to start with brief introductions. For those that don't know me already, I'm Andrew Taylor. I'm currently running the sales function for Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific regions for Ready. So primarily we focus on student engagement, and these areas that have been highlighted in the poll are areas that we're really seeing institutions try and leverage solutions to with our platform. And one of the great examples that we've got a really wonderful partner for us to work with, I think a partnership that gives us a lot of insight into student challenges as well as improving our offering, is the University of Birmingham. And I'm really grateful, well, doubly grateful for Cherry, who's stepped in relatively late to lead this, but also is a really well positioned to have a conversation with us today just around how the University of Birmingham are dealing with this. So over to you, Cherry. Thank you so much.
No problem at all. Lovely to be here. Thank you, Andy. So I'm Cherry, as Andy mentioned. I'm the product owner for MyUOB, which is our student application provided by Ready Education. And my role essentially is working on behalf of and in collaboration with our users, stakeholders, and Ready Education to make sure that our students get the absolute most value possible out of that application.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just to frame our conversation today, we've obviously used quite emotive language, really to try and bring as many people as we can into the discussion. But these are the words that we're having on or words that are being used on a day-to-day basis now with our customers in higher education: pressure, isolation, and dropout. And we've been doing a lot of work at Ready in the last, well, you could argue 5 years, but really that focal point post-pandemic into things like well-being and financial struggles that I think clearly aren't just related to students, but we just see it at that kind of sharp edge with students coming into institutions, leaving home for the first time, and the effect that has on 18-year-olds is huge. And it gives us a challenge from I guess a moral and doing the right thing perspective, but also making sure that these students are getting value for money and leaving institutions, leaving university with actually a good degree and a prospect for future life. And I think most people on here will agree that university is much more than just coming out with the academic side of things, but coming out as a resilient individual, someone that can learn to live by themselves, that can balance the books at the end of the month after getting the paycheck. We should be preparing people for future life, and these areas I think are critical. So if we move into the discussion here, we don't just want to present you with the problem that you're already familiar with, as we've termed it here, the growing student crisis. We want to give you some ideas of how one institution, in this case, the University of Birmingham, is trying to combat some of these challenges. But more than that, at the end of this, we'd like to give you a few different tools, tips and tricks, ways of thinking about the challenge to actually help you address this moving forward. And the crisis, as we've called it, I think is still unfolding. This isn't something that happened during the pandemic. This is something that I think has been happening long before. It just really came into a sharper focus during that time, and coming out the other side, there's still a real sense of societal anxiety. There's a real sense of concern and worry, and as I said earlier, that really is highlighted in those kind of first few years from leaving home and going into university. And we all think, why should we care? We obviously should care as fellow human beings, but when we look at our institutions and our businesses, we see this has a significant impact on our success rates and the things that we want to measure. And here's some of the data that we're seeing across Europe for this, but definitely the case in the UK is a huge dropout rate, early dropout from education, and even increasingly training, which was seen as an alternative to students coming out of school to go into something more vocational, and things like apprenticeships on the increase. Actually still seeing the same challenges are going across the whole different space of education in the different formats. And we've highlighted some of these things here, and we've picked a few areas that we're going to go through today. I'm actually just going to ask Cherry to give us an insight into where the University of Birmingham is and how you're trying to engage your students now and give them a way of finding the support they need at the right points in time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So just a little bit of context, I suppose, to set the scene. So we're a university in central England. We were founded in 1900. We're a Russell Group university, which means that we have a lot of research happening. So we've got students at all different levels of studying. We've actually got just shy of 40,000 students all across the world. So we've got our UK campus. We also have a campus in Dubai, and we've got partnerships with students in Singapore, in China as well. So students all over the world, really. And that's informed our goal for MyUOB, which is that we want it to be a convenient way for students to connect with the services that they really, really need. So day to day, on the go, whilst they're traveling between their studies, while they're on campus. And we've got a real emphasis on personalization. So we'll talk a bit later about communication, and actually having relevant personalized services and information is something that's really core to our mission with the application.
We've got a little teaser of the application there. Thanks, Pascaline. This is a really engaging platform. I think you've done an amazing job at Birmingham of building this out, and we'll definitely be talking a little bit about this. But just to frame it for the attendees on the call, this isn't a presentation about MyUOB or Ready. This is really, we want to give you some things that will be useful for your institution, whether you're using our products or not. It's just that Birmingham obviously have decided to use MyUOB quite a lot for this. So if we kick off into the first area that we've highlighted, which is the financial struggles. And I think everyone on this call, everyone around the world has felt increased financial pressure in the last probably 12, 18 months. We've seen just the geopolitical situation, as well as just local conditions become much more challenging. And again, students, I think, are at the sharpest point of this. We're seeing now this being classed as, students have never been considered to be well off, and it's almost been that thing about learning to survive and making your student loans last throughout the term. But actually looking at what's been termed as very serious financial difficulties. These are students using things like food banks and having to go and find support that we just haven't seen we haven't had to see before. And it's become a huge challenge, I think, for students, but because of that on universities. And I just wanted to ask you, Cherry, in terms of, I guess, your student demographic. This is a Russell Group institution. These are well academically grounded students in the most case coming to the University of Birmingham. But what pressure does this put on you as an institution to try and help students with something that's so fundamental as just making sure they can eat properly and look after themselves before they even get into the lecture theatre?
I think it's definitely a topic that we need to be addressing as a university. Obviously, our obligations to a student is to make sure that they're well positioned to be able to learn from us or research with us. So we have a campaign called Support with Living Costs, a really catchy title, but does what it says on the tin. And this is a real wealth of resources. So we've essentially pulled together everything into one place that they will need to help manage their money. I'm sure you can imagine a university of our size has a great amount of information and a great amount of systems and services available. So the last thing you want to do when you're worried about something is to be looking all over the place for that information. So we're fronting it in one place. Really, it is a mixture of advice, information, also resources that students can go to for assistance. And we've got, you can see on the screen, this little YouTube video in the corner. So we have a scheme called Student Content Shapers, where we pay a group of students to create videos, blogs, information that's going to help students through their journey at university. And actually having that information coming from peers, we found to be really powerful, and we've had some really good feedback about that from our students. So they've created some videos such as this one you can see about hints and tips for managing your money and so on. And I think really the challenge is providing adequate information for students at any point in their journey and at any level of study and in any of their circumstances. So as you mentioned, as I mentioned, we've got researchers, we've got distance learners, we've got adult learners, apprentices, and your undergraduate 18-year-olds who have just left home. So it's a real wide scope of users who we have to provide information for, which is why we have all of these different links and all of these different resources available in one place. And actually our Guild of Students has been doing some really great work. So they have a fund that you can apply for, a financial relief fund. They've got a community pantry, and they've also got mentoring schemes for students to learn more about how to manage their money in a more effective way.
So you've got the whole spectrum in terms of obviously the different types of students you're supporting and researchers, etc. But you've got the proactive, preemptive money management, budgeting, right through to the I actually really need help now as well. And I can just see some of the screenshots you've got here. These are, as you say, just signposting them sometimes is the biggest challenge. And even just seeing that you're not alone, I think this is something else that we've seen, that kind of shame of being in this situation is a big blocker for people either getting support or going and finding it. But you've made it really prominent here. You've got students helping other students. I love the kind of the video concept and students creating the content. I suppose that you found that, relatively more powerful than necessarily a kind of staff or student service being run, have you, in terms of students seeing other students on the content?
Yeah, definitely. So, as you said, there's definitely a feeling of, well, I'm not in this alone when you've got your
Yeah,
peers talking to you about their struggles and how to manage their money and your money. But also, I think that it would be very easy for students to see a disconnect between staff at the university telling them how to manage their money
yeah.
who may not be in a similar situation to the situation the student is in, and it just makes it that much more relatable and less condescending, if I
Yeah,
may say so, than potentially somebody who is quite well paid telling a student how to manage their money.
there's definitely that element of, my parents always told me when the the loan came in, don't waste it, don't spend it all in the, and you're like, yeah, of course, whatever. But seeing your peers actually try and stretch that out and make it last and give you tips and tricks is much more relatable. So, and these videos, how are they produced? Are they done? Is the university producing them with students, and the students doing them themselves? What the actual logistics of creating these? What does that look like?
So the student content shapers, because they're employed by the university as content creators, they're given a brief. They create the sort of raw material, start to edit it together, and the university supports them in pulling it together into a final package, I suppose,
Yeah,
to be promoted across all of our platforms, including within MyUOB, where it can be embedded into a video tile. So right there, easy to access. Also available on Instagram and other social
yeah.
media channels as well.
And how many student content shapers do you have?
Good question. Um, I
A
would
few.
I would defer that to my student communications colleagues if they were here.
Fair enough.
It's a reasonable group. It's not
Yeah.
hundreds. I think there's probably between 10 and 20. And
Okay.
they're
Yeah, makes
across,
sense.
yeah, they're across different levels of study as well. So we have actually we've got a really popular video which has been going viral in the last couple of weeks from one of our PhD students who is in his 60s. So we've got a real
Oh wow.
breadth
Okay.
of student representation in the content shapers. And I think a benefit of having them employed by the university and really close to us being able to create that content is that we can also seed into them the information that they need. So for example, the money management tips video, they can give their personal experience, but we can also say, and all of these resources are available
Yeah.
from the university. Can you weave this into your video, please, to raise awareness of them?
I really like that. And just one final thing that comes through for me on some of the work you're doing here is the relationship you have, obviously, with the student body. You're employing some of them, but by the sounds of it, the Students' Union as well. There seems to be quite a good partnership between the university and the SU with initiatives like this.
Yes, absolutely. So I should have clarified earlier, our student union are called the Guild of Students here. So they are set up as a separate entity, but it's very close collaboration with the university to provide services to students that
Yeah.
students need. Yeah.
We're definitely seeing that shift across the market as well. A few years ago, they were almost deliberately kind of separate and almost threw rocks over the wall at each other. But we're seeing, this crisis. Some of the good things that have come out of that is just everyone getting behind the cause and supporting each other. We just had a comment in here as well from I think it's actually one of our customers, but user research has shown at this institution that financial worries were up there, and actually part-time job. And I think this is a really good segue into the next area that I wanted to talk about, the academic pressure. And one of the things that comes through for me is, how can you succeed academically if either you're not able to eat properly and have a decent baseline of life, and then we're seeing part-time work become a really important thing students needing to do. And I think it should be encouraged as it's great experience for future life and going into the world of work. It obviously gives you some financial benefit as well and takes the pressure off, but it does start eating away at some of the time that traditionally you might have been spending in the library and working on academic endeavours. I think we're seeing now the academic pressure has almost become, it's become such a strange thing with the introduction of fees, the competitive nature of graduate employment, but it's happened at the same time we're seeing all these other pressures intensify as well. So we're seeing that students actually don't get as much support, don't take advantage of the support that's often there from universities to help academically. And we're seeing 20% of students effectively seek professional help in this regard. And the amount of stress now caused by university courses. And again, the other trend that I've noticed is contact time has significantly increased. I remember when I went to university, I think my first year was 9 or 10 hours a week of contact time, and the rest self-directed. I've seen the amount of contact hours has gone up, and the amount of work that needs to be submitted. And I don't know how close you are to this, Cherry, but a comment in terms of Birmingham, a globally renowned institution, the academic quality is critical to Birmingham maintaining and increasing its place in the league tables. How do you think that is currently being done at Birmingham to make sure that doesn't drop alongside these other challenges we're seeing?
I mean, contact time varies across programs, and
Right.
it's definitely something that's on our agenda, particularly post-pandemic. I think many institutions will probably recognize a feeling of not wanting their qualifications to be felt or viewed that they've been watered down by online teaching and online um, assessment. So we are putting a lot of effort into making sure that they are academically sound and always have been. Completely recognize that actually the increased amount of hours working does put pressure on students.
Mm.
And actually, our response to that as an institution is to bring in a learning analytics tool. So this is a tool that's developed within IT services with input from academic student services actually across the board of the university. And essentially, it is bringing together integrations from our virtual learning environment, which we use Canvas, from Panopto, which is a video recording element, and also from the attendance capture, which is provided by SysConnect within MyUOB. Essentially, what that does is show to teaching staff how many hours a student has spent engaging with teaching materials, how many lectures they've attended, and essentially their level of engagement. So the learning analytics team are constantly looking to add more data sources. So, for example, they're looking at provisional grades, assessment results, everything that will demonstrate how a student is performing and how they're engaging with university. Now, the benefit of staff having access to this is that they can identify students who are at risk. So, for example, if they know that, say, 80% attendance is basically average on the psychology lectures, anybody who dips below that, they can proactively start a process of reaching out to that student. At the moment, learning analytics is available to a small subset of students. So they're right at the start of their journey of rolling it out to the student body. But actually, the student experience is really empowering. So they're providing students the ability to set attendance targets and say, I want to make sure I go to 95% of my classes or 100% of my
Okay.
classes. I want to make sure that I watch 10 hours of Panopto videos every week. And actually, when the students' activities dip below that level, the app will prompt them to say, are you okay? Do you need to reach out to somebody? Here is a link to wellbeing officers. Here's a link to resources. So it's very much making sure that students are identified early if they're at risk based on their academic engagement.
This is less kind of monitoring in the sense of the university making the student do certain types of activities and at certain frequencies. It's actually about the student saying, here's the goals I'm setting for myself,
Yes.
and the university helping them to achieve those and measuring. Yeah, I mean, it's quite, is that quite unique, would you say, in the market? A lot of it seems to be the other way from what I see. It seems to be university saying, here's what good looks like, and we expect you to meet or exceed that, rather than a student saying, here's what I'd like to set for myself.
I think there's definitely been a lot of focus on, for example, attendance monitoring for compliance
Okay, yeah,
reasons.
yeah.
Obviously, the UKVI regulations and accredited programs need to have proof of attendance and so on for their purposes. But yeah, I wouldn't like to comment really, but I think that the approach of putting the control on the student to say, these are my benchmarks, and having the data visible to both the student and their teaching staff and their
Yeah.
personal tutor means that they can have a more open conversation than, like you say, that sort of dictatorial approach.
Some of the other institutions that I've seen do this, it's almost added to the pressure for students. Like when they open their app and the attendance tile is bright red, they've dropped below a threshold, the grades aren't great, they've got an overdue library book, and I sometimes just look at the experience and think, if you're stressed already, if you've got a lot going on already, the last thing you need is more kind of stress adding to that. And I love the idea of it being visible to students, them taking their key role in setting their own targets, and then obviously they'd be more bought into it as a result. So it's very much a kind of partnership again between the institution and the student. Would you say, obviously, Russell Group institution, is that easier to do with students that are, I guess, stereotypically more academically disciplined and maybe more likely to do that, would you say? Or do you think that's going to
No,
be more across the board? Yeah, okay.
I think
Yeah,
a student is a student
yeah,
wherever they end up studying. And I don't think it's necessarily about the student themselves. I think it's about how the university presents it. And if you're
yeah,
presenting it as, I know it's something extra to do at the start of the lecture, but ultimately this is a benefit for everybody, rather than
yeah,
do this or you'll be hauled into an office to be told off,
yes,
then
yeah,
I think that's what helps with the rollout.
yeah. Makes sense. There's a question here. I think it's on the goal setting on the learner analytics side of things, but whether the goals that the student sets are private and personal just to them, or could that be shared with their personal tutor, for example?
Good question. I'm not sure. Sorry.
That's fine. We definitely follow up on that
Yes.
afterwards. Thanks for the question, and I'll just take this opportunity to remind you the chat is there if there's any comments, questions that you want to put in. So we've talked a lot about the next area kind of in passing already, but I think the communication piece, and I think clearly what the University of Birmingham is able to do is work very closely with students and make students feel like they're part of their own journey and a key part of that. They're not just there to be taught and be passive in that. They're very much an active partner with the institution. And some of the screenshots that you've shown already, the app seems to be a big part of the communication approach for Birmingham. And I think this is where when we speak to students and we ask them what their frustrations are, a lot of the time they either ask for things or ask for help that already exists, they just didn't know about it, or they can't find things, or it's never usually that the institution hasn't considered what the student might need. And I think this is where my UOB for Birmingham has become that starting point, the launching pad, the single point of access, whatever the terminology is that the market uses at the moment. But how powerful has my UOB been for all these initiatives and others at Birmingham?
I think communication through my UOB is a really big part of making students aware of what support's available to them. And actually, as I'm sure many people who are attending today will relate to, we've had issues with students really picking up communications and responding to them. So they were reporting really high levels of emails coming from lots of different
Mm,
sources, not being able to really understand what was relevant to them, what they really needed to read, and also sending by email by default means obviously all your communication is coming in via text. If that's coming from lots of different teams across the university, then there's not consistency on how that text is presented. There's no consistency or joined up feeling about the timings. And actually, this prompted our student communications team to reconsider their strategy in response to this. And they've created a much more broad and much more inclusive, I would say, communication strategy. And in collaboration with us, we now take many actions within my UOB to communicate information to students. So some of the things you can see on the screen, for example, we have started harnessing the push notifications that my UOB can push out, as well as pop-up notifications. So
Mm.
that would be when a student first goes into my UOB, a message is displayed before they can get to the dashboard, and they have to acknowledge that they've read it before they can carry on and use my UOB. Obviously, with our focus of giving students an experience that will help them day to day when they're on campus walking around, that's not something they want to be seeing every day or even every week. So we're really careful about when we send those out, and it's only if there's really important information that we need to give to students. So things like their timetable being available, or a very important event happening, or a change to what had been previously communicated. And we also use, I mentioned earlier, making uh, my UAB highly personalized to the students. So we use Azure Active Directory at the university, and we group students by certain characteristics in their profile to target information at them. So, for example, in Welcome Week, Student Communications manage a news feed that has lots of information about events that are happening, reminders to sort of go and pick up your ID card and that kind of thing. And that's targeted at our new joiners. They will get push notifications for that, but students who are coming back for their second, third, fourth year won't get that. And
Mm.
that is because we want to make sure that new students are highly involved, highly engaged, they're being given the information because they might not know where to look for it, and that they feel part of the university straight away. So you can see clearly there's a lot of flexibility in how we're giving push notifications, and students do not want to be overwhelmed by them, and that's why we're very selective about when we send them. Again, we've talked through the banners at the top of the screen already. The screenshots you can see here where it says welcome to my UOB at the top, that's where we put our campaigns, so that when the user goes into the app, they see straight away the headline that we need them to see that day. We have the embedded videos that we spoke about previously, and that feeling of inclusion in the community with their peers
Yeah.
talking to them. So we use that very heavily for the student content shaper videos. And because we have our different personalized dashboards for different cohorts, so we have one for our taught students, one for our research students, one for our Dubai students, and we're shortly going live with a dashboard for apprentices. It means we can add different videos to different dashboards depending on the audience as well. So, for example, we have our VC's welcome video, which he does every year across all of our dashboards at the start of the year, so that everybody visiting the app feels like they're being welcomed to the university. And I think as well, the use of news feeds is really powerful. So we've been trying to, as I mentioned earlier, move away from using highly text-based updates to this
Mm.
more sort of short summaries of news, visual banners, and the video content as well. But actually having news feeds that are highly relevant to you, I think is really powerful. So we have student news, which everybody needs to know. And then we're piloting targeted news feeds that are subscription based. So
Mm.
for our disabled students service, for example, there will be a news feed that students can subscribe to that will give them information about services that the team offer, opportunities, support, that kind of thing. So really, I suppose our focus with communications in MyUOB is to make less noise towards students and actually provide them with a variety of relevant information. And you can see here, student communications do a survey every year to understand how students want to be engaged with. And MyUOB is the third option for the question, what is your main source of information? Slightly ahead of Instagram, I'm very pleased to report. Um, but we can see that students still actually rely on their email, and they still rely on notifications through our virtual learning environment. But luckily for them, both of those things are actually available in MyUOB. So even if they go into MyUOB, they've still got access to those information sources that they traditionally use and they're heavily relying on. And here are some examples of the kind of campaigns that we've run in our banners. So we're talking today about well-being, financial support, and I mentioned earlier our Time to Talk campaign, and we're signposting users again to living costs. And you can just see from this graph is showing the engagement that students have with these banners. When we put them on the app, obviously the views of the banners will be however many people are visiting the app, but actually converting those into visits to the information, you can see that the cost of living was head and shoulders above any of the other campaigns that we ran through the last academic year. Students really need that information, and they're really clearly happy to have it signposted to them. And if you look at the kind of campaigns that are at this top end of what students are engaging with, you've got the cost of living, you've got exam revision support, you've got our Time to Talk. So very support heavy and support seeking services.
Yeah, wow, this is great data. There's been quite a bit of engagement on this part of the presentation as well. So I'm just gonna go through it in real time here. So the first question, you've touched on this a little bit, but the personalisation aspects that you have any of these areas built a sense of community? You mentioned sense of belonging among students, and I think in those Welcome Week examples you used. Have you got any other concrete examples of where you think the MyUOB platform has helped build sense of belonging and community?
I think it's a mixture of how we're using it to engage with students. So we have the news feeds around events. So we're making sure that students can get to events that they're interested in, to meet other students, to engage with other students. We've got our banner campaigns, which means that students can access the campaigns that are relevant to them, can contact staff when they need to contact staff. We've got the videos being surfaced there, which are made by their peers. And making sure that they are seeing the information that's relevant to them. So it's essentially our approach is to make the app almost their, I don't want to use cliched language, but it's sort of their gateway into their university
Yeah,
experience.
yeah. I mean, it's quite a hard thing to measure how much has the app built a sense of belonging or a sense of community. It's kind of a softer thing, but you can certainly see with some of these metrics you've got here that it's used a lot, and like the support elements that you've got on this current slide, clearly it's one of the places that students seem to be coming when they need that help. If you could just go back, Pascaline, to the slide with the list of one before this one. There's a really good point raised here. It's really nicely phrased as well, but the noise to signal ratio is devilishly hard to get right. I think when I look down this list of the different ways you engage with students through this platform, sorry, no, it was the one before, Pascaline, but how do you know when to use a push notification? You've mentioned kind of levels of importance. Is that black and white? Is it kind of subjective in those moments? And then probably a little bit vaguer is the ones below that. Should we do a video versus a newsfeed post? Or maybe you could just comment a little bit on getting that engagement right at this place.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, as you say, it's a balance. And we're very lucky to have a department who are specialists in student communications to support us in decision making, and we work really collaboratively with them. So they will bring an idea to us, we will take an idea to them, we'll have a conversation about appropriate ways of communicating that through MyUOB. We do tend to reserve the pop-up notifications for things which are vital for students to know. And examples would be the Queen's funeral fell on the first day of our Welcome Week.
Yeah,
So we needed to make sure that students were aware that there was a change to the service we'd previously advertised. So that was an example of when we'd absolutely need students to know something urgent, very important, or very impactful. Push notifications we tend to use quite limited because we know, because students have told us that if they get too many, they'll turn them off, which means obviously they won't be effective at all. So we do tend to use them in the targeted ways that I mentioned previously to entice students into information that they might not have known was there previously. And our Welcome Week is a great example of that. So new students, they don't know where to go for information necessarily. So we're giving them the way in. We use it also for other events we run through the year. So we have a sort of mini festival in between our semesters where students can go along to workshops and events that are supposed to give them enrich their skills essentially. So again, we use it in examples like that. We tend to balance campaigns are obviously much more pushing the information to people, to users, but we also make sure that information that is going to be relevant all the time is available in the app all the time. So for example, we've got a student support tile, we've got an IT services support tile, we've got a MyUOB support tile, which is static links to information they're going to need any time of the year, whether we've got a campaign running or not. So it's hard to get the balance, but it's normally we get to an agreement on how to communicate through collaboration, essentially.
Yeah. And this is kind of linked to that. I guess you are clearly measuring the efficacy of how you're communicating, and one of the questions is how you measure the success other than analytics when you're looking at banner clicks, videos being watched. Is there anything beyond just the click and access, or is that in other teams at the moment?
I think this is a really interesting question because obviously as the product owner for the app, my interest is the analytics in the app. As the providers of, say, wellbeing services, the wellbeing team will be the people to look at how that journey is fulfilled through the service provision. A university as a whole, clearly their success metrics are how many students drop out, how many are retained, how many reach out for help and have that help provided to them. So it's, I think, a much more wide ranging and it's a web of success across many different cogs in a massive wheel.
A web of success. I love it. And just before we move on to our final topic of well-being, there's just a question about how long you've had MyUOB live, and not the question is how long did it take to get so deeply embedded, but maybe a comment on how you even got it this deeply embedded as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could talk about this all day, but I'm not going to. MyUOB was released in September 2020, a very challenging time for students and a very challenging time to get an app implementation right. We did pull a product team around the app fairly quickly after it was initially implemented. And we've been working ever since, as I mentioned, in collaboration with stakeholders like the student communications team, like student services, in collaboration with our users to make sure that we're giving them the right thing and things that are valuable to them. So because we've got a dedicated team, it means that we can very quickly react to user feedback. So if they tell us they don't like something, we'll validate it, we'll do it, providing that it's appropriate. So it has taken, I mean, it depends again what your measures of success are. We've seen year on year a massive increase in returning users. We've seen our user satisfaction go up. It might go up even more. So I wouldn't like to say that it is fully embedded now, but we've definitely spent focused time in the last 3 years getting it there.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you. So just on to our actually there is just one more question on the feedback. Can you give us a feel for what kind of feedback you're getting? So comments you receive from students about MyUOB?
Yeah, absolutely. So as always, and I'm sure you are all experienced in, students have a variety of opinions. Things that we're doing well for them is they like the fact that a lot of their key services that they use all the time are in one place. They do like the layout, so they have said that it's easy to navigate. Um, and they also like the fact that, so it's a mobile application, but you can also log into it on a web browser. So they can access it whether they're sort of sitting in their halls studying or whether they're out and about on campus. So on the flip side, some of the things that they have mentioned that we can work on are things like there's definitely more of a trend I've noticed towards students wanting their information served to them in a more integrated way with their own device. What I mean by that is they want their calendar in their phone calendar. They want to be told, you have a lesson coming up in 15 minutes. And there's a real hunger there for that very immediate information. So I think that we're doing some things well, and there are some things that we need to look into to make sure that we're keeping up with student expectations.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, again, I think that's fairly consistent feedback we get across the board. Like, it's kind of foundational what we have. You bring everything into one place, but it's that next level of giving the nudges at the right point and having the interventions right at the right points on the journey. Thank you, and yeah, thanks for the questions. Please keep them coming. Some great points in here. So just onto our final area now, Pascaline, into well-being. Again, similar to the communication thing, this is a kind of all-encompassing, become a real challenge for universities that, again, I don't think was that big a few years ago. We're actually looking after the whole person now, not just the student. And some of the data that we see in this area is quite honestly depressing reading. We're seeing now 80% of young people are much more likely to report symptoms of depression or anxiety. We see that follow students from university into early careers, into life as well. And I think it's something that if we can really help build the resilience and build the support around students at the time during the time at university, it will help them probably more so than their degree ever will in later life. And I think some of this is just a symptom of the world in which we live. Everything, everywhere you look now, is kind of quite a depressing view. We're thinking, on the student journey, and we've touched on quite a few of these things already because it's something that's just at the forefront, I guess, of what you're doing when you're engaging with students on a day-to-day basis. But one of the banners you showed us was time to talk. I think just promoting that, the healthy nature of having someone that you can go out and reach out to. I've spoken a couple of times as well about that you're not on your own. These kind of messages are quite prevalent in some of your campaigns you're running at Birmingham.
Yeah, so time to talk is our sort of main overarching engagement with wellbeing services, I suppose, would be a good way of putting it. Underneath that, we've got a real, what I would call a spectrum of offerings. And I think it's really important to recognize as an institution that well-being, mental health, talking is not just somebody feeling depressed and needing a counselling session, but actually ranges all the way from students needing advice on how to have balance in their lives and how to make healthier choices, right the way through to really serious problems like addiction, like suicidal thoughts. And actually, you have to provide services that really cover that complete spectrum. Complicated, of course, by the fact that we've been through a pandemic. Students were not as immediately close to us as they had been previously, physically close to us.
Yeah.
And that's made us think about what we're offering to students in a different way. So, for example, we've got a partnership now with a company called Spectrum Life. We've called it You Be Heard, because we love using the letters UOB
Yeah.
in campaigns. And that's a 24-hour support line. You can access it by phone, live chat, texting, WhatsApp, any time of day, connecting students to somebody who will listen to them. We also have a partnership with Forward Thinking Birmingham, which is an NHS mental health initiative, and they provide wellbeing drop-ins. So that's more of a place to come and chill out and do some crafts, have some discussions. And I think it's that element of providing the space for students to do those things. And again, as we were talking about earlier, having this all in one place under one banner on one information page means that a student who is in crisis, or even who wants to know more, doesn't have to go searching for that information, because that's clearly the last thing that they'd want to do when they're in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got some feedback in here as well. And again, this, when I read this, it kind of was quite moving for me to read some of this feedback from real students.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks for itself, really. They're sort of joined up and various offerings. So, we've got these partnerships I've been talking about. We've got wellbeing officers in every school, in every college, within the university, who can intervene in different ways. So we're giving students a variety of resources to engage with to help them with their well-being. And I like to think that that's reflected in that feedback. And again, we're talking, like I mentioned, about that spectrum. We have the world of well-being, which is more sort of self-help guides, making those right choices yourself, reaching out when you need to.
Yeah, the kind of empowerment theme definitely comes through in your campaigns.
Yeah, and making sure that information's always there as well is really key.
Yeah.
Here, another great example of the student content shapers. And I think this is a really good example because Anita's top tips on looking after yourself over the Christmas break. With a university of our size and with the amount of international students that we have, we've got to be aware that not every student's experience is going to be going home to their parents for a nice Christmas. Actually, a lot of students are staying in the country, in not their home country, staying in a city that they've only been in for 3 months. And something that we're really keen as a university to do is make sure that when the university is closed over the Christmas period and over the summer period and over Easter, that those students are still connected to the university, have got the resources to look after themselves and still feel like the university hasn't just abandoned them for a couple of weeks in, the darkest and coldest part of the year.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking us through some of the things you've been doing at Birmingham. As I said at the beginning, I really get a lot out of the partnership with you. And there's been some great questions throughout, so thank you for those. We've got a few minutes, so if you've still got questions, please put them in. I just want to touch on a couple of these questions now, and then I'll finish on the takeaways. There's one about the attendance piece, and it's encouraging students without kind of compliance or mandatory reasons to record attendance. Have you found a way of engaging them to actually want to do that of their own accord?
I would say nothing concrete that guarantees it is done every time. Again, it's a case of, I suppose, selling the joint benefits. And I think when we get to the point that learning analytics is available to all students, there'll be a much clearer route between I put in my attendance code and I see in learning analytics that I have attended, and I can see my attendance average, and I can see how many sessions I've attended. So I think at that point, we'll be in a much better position to encourage students to do it.
So yeah, the visibility is one part of it, isn't it? But then joining that up to
Absolutely.
the ultimate, why you're attending in the first place.
Yes.
Yeah, makes complete sense. The feedback that you showed, the student feedback, is that done within the app or is that done externally via surveys?
Many different ways, to be honest. So we have a couple of industry surveys which we run as a university about IT and digital services, which give students the ability to feedback on their experiences. We do have a rating system and a questionnaire within the app as well. We do proactively go to students and ask them their opinions. So lots of different ways.
Yeah, makes sense. And then there's just a question about improving dropout rates since you've launched. I think the one thing that I just caveat before I pass the question over to you is that, you know, especially somewhere like Birmingham, there's thousands of things you're doing to make sure students stay at university and succeed. And whether that's, you know, the facilities like beautiful campus, encouraging people to be there, whether it's mobile app, whether it's quality of teaching and learning, whatever that is. But maybe you could just comment more broadly about the university's dropout rates and maybe some of the initiatives, if you've got any of that data to hand.
I think I would probably defer that question until I've spoken to our external relations
Fair
team
enough.
about how much I can share. But
Fair
definitely, as you've said, there's so much work going on across the university. I mean, I'm presenting as one person today, but there are hundreds of people involved in all of the things I've talked about across the
Yeah,
university, and providing that that underpinning support for students.
yeah, perfect. Thank you. And there's a comment here. I think it's probably what every university, especially in the UK, but I think it's a global challenge of we are at the point where there's so much of a burden on institutions to provide that mental health support and the well-being. And you're talking about kind of right at the extreme end, the kind of real crises point. It still falls on the university. And whether you could comment briefly on whether you think there's a systemic change needed that ultimately supports universities with this.
I think quite possibly. If I look at our strategy for Birmingham, what we're trying to do is give students good quality education wherever they are in the world, wherever they're joining us from, to be able to create sustainable futures, to be able to engage with their communities, and to get a good quality education. So, in order for them to do that, we definitely need to support them in things which are stopping them from doing that. Um, we're in a time of crisis, and I think we need to respond as anybody would respond in a crisis, to making sure those baseline provisions are there before thinking about systemic change. But yes, I think it would be
Yes,
beneficial.
I absolutely agree from my perspective looking in as well. So Cherry, you know, thank you so much. There's been some really great comments and feedback for the session, so thank you for sharing that with
Thank
us.
you for having me.
Honestly, a pleasure was mine. And just to wrap up, really, some of the kind of summary points and takeaways for you, um, based on working with Birmingham and others, but really kind of help universities understand the main challenges facing students. We're all seeing some of these. There's clearly a lot of overlap with those. We've spoken a lot about sense of community and sense of belonging, which I think Birmingham do exceptionally well at, as well as, and it's linked to, but as well as the signposting, people knowing support's there. You've spoken about having it all year round when it makes sense, and having it targeted when it's kind of those critical points. Smartphone and being where the student is. We've looked at some of your data. We see email being a big challenge for a lot of universities. So being a bit more kind of thoughtful and targeted with how that happens definitely works. We've got plenty of data to support that now. And then obviously we would think this, but having it in a single place really, really helps. And here's a nice graphic at the end. So that just really leaves me to thank everyone for joining. Thank you for the questions, the engagement, the feedback that you've given. Huge thank you to the University of Birmingham and especially to you, Cherry, for jumping in today. I will just say as well, when we'll circulate the slides, there'll be a link in there if anybody would like to donate. But Cherry has asked for a donation to be made to Cannock District Food Bank, part of the Trussell Trust. So we'll definitely put a link in the email if anyone would like to do that as well. Thank you so much, and thank you to you, Sizer, for having us, and that just leaves me to say goodbye, and we'll see you soon.